in our series of conversations on journeys. I've spent a considerable amount of time today explaining. I've spent a considerable amount of time today explaining in almost every session. This is what the session means. This is what the sessions mean. This is how we put it together. But here we have three individuals who are poets of the absolute highest order. So in this case, I don't think I'm going to explain what the exact meaning of the parallel journeys is. It's called Multiple Tracks, and it features the great Keki Daruwalla, Mr. Ranjit Hoskote in conversation with Sridala Swami, and I think you're in tune for a very great treat. Please, Ranjit and Keki and Sridala, join us on stage. Yes, please.
Hi, and thank you for being there at the last session for this afternoon. I mean, you're not awake. I'm fascinated. No, I think it's great. It takes as much energy to listen as it does to participate in a session. So thank you for being awake and thank you for being there.
Let's give a hand to the audience.
I was sitting in through most of the previous session, and I'm really not certain that there's a difference between their session and ours. So we could so easily have combined the two sessions and made a big party out of it. But we're supposed to talk about parallel journeys in this session, and I thought I'd begin with our double lives, the double lives of poets. Everyone knows Keki's poetry, everyone knows Ranjit's poetry, but this audience may not know your other lives as well. And the thing about autobiography is that is the thing everyone is most interested in when you read a work. But often the personal elements are the least interesting thing about the work. But regardless of that, I'm going to begin by asking you to tell us a little bit about your the professional part of your life, the non-poetic part of your life, and how it feeds into your poetry. What that is.
One has been asked this question far too often. I mean, all my life I have had to wrestle with this particular question: policeman, poet, this, that, intelligence. Now I feel that when you are writing, whether you are writing prose, fiction, or whether because now I am turning more and more to prose, whether you are writing fiction or poetry, you keep your two selves apart. Of course, the earlier part, when I went into the police, the first two books they reflect my job, the harsh realities of life, of crime, etc. Some poems, 5 or 6, and that was it. Otherwise, you keep at least I have kept my two selves very separate. For example, I was in intelligence for 21 years, but as an analyst, so all the politics that I analyzed, politics abroad, West Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, that is a part of me, but that hasn't appeared in the poems. Similarly, this never came out. I mean, these are my roots. I never went back to. There was one Parsi poem I remember, Nissim Ezekiel, hosting one of my early readings, and Dastur Bod was there. He was a very big priest amongst the Parsis. And the first question he asked me after I had finished my reading, "You've never written about the Parsis?" I never had. Even here, I really haven't. But I went back into history due to a particular accident. They asked me to write about the Parsis. The book on the Parsis, and a poetry book came out instead. So I have kept myself apart, and the fortunate thing was that in government nobody reads. So after Mrs. Gandhi came back to power in 1980, I came out with the book Winter Burn. Half of it was on the emergency. Nobody read it. I was never asked. No one asked my explanation. That was who's bothered. So, and one wrote quite freely. One wrote quite freely. That much I'll say. Now and then you become a little politic. Just, you don't want to hurt someone too badly or too much. That's about it. Because I started as a satirist. In college, when I wrote, it was all satire and nothing else.
That's interesting. Have you kept any of those verses?
Not really. There were lampoons on other people's poetry. Yes.
Ranjit, would you like to talk about how you, I don't know which came first, frankly. I don't know whether you were writing poetry first, or you were talking about art, or writing about art, or whether it was simultaneous. What was it? How did
I never talked about art. You
No,
are
I'm asking
mistaking me for
Ranjit. I'm asking Ranjit this question, Keki. Sorry.
What came first? What actually came first was neither of these. What came first was the visual image. Because when I was a child, that's what I began with.
You used to paint?
Yeah, I used to paint. And this went on for a while. And I suspect that what got me off it was the fact that the school and so forth thought that this was a good thing to be doing, at which point I parted ways with. I didn't want to have this regimented in any way. So my interest in the visual image went sort of underground. But I also began writing at the same time. So all of this was, I was what, 13, 14, 15?
No, I don't understand what you mean by the school.
I don't know if this happens to, I think it happens to a lot of people. If you're good at art, then the school sort of trundles you off to competitions and things. So this was decades ago. And there's an expectation that since you're good at it, you'll be groomed in a certain way. And that's what I didn't want. Because it means falling into a kind of established pedagogy. Then that's really not what I wanted. I wanted to explore the visual image on my own terms without it falling into some kind of officially sanctioned.
So, are you, in a sense, you're saying you started writing in order to avoid art?
No. This is not a causality. I also began to write, and it was completely fortuitous that I actually turned to writing on art, because it was something that I seemed to have lost for myself. So I needed to bear witness to it in some other way. And that is, I think, when I began to really respond in writing to paintings that I loved, or to other forms of art. And I would really not, in another conversation I've talked about how for me it's like a starfish at different practices. They move out of a set of common concerns.
Yeah.
So
They appear different, but they have.
yeah, they have some unifying connection, but it's not an either or.
You know, the interesting thing that I find about both your works, Keki's and you, Ranjit, is that in your poetry, you may not refer to your other lives as, you deal with art much more in your poetry than Keki does with his other work. But where you're exploring your identity in a sense, as opposed to your professional life or your writing life, is when it comes to your translations or your exploration of your identities via, history or your historical books. So if both of you could talk about what you do with that, your translations of Laleh and your, fire altar poems.
Can I say something about Ranjit?
Yeah.
Isn't it natural that the two streams, one poetry, the other art, and art goes into criticism, am I right? And poetry is totally creative. Would you? So, don't you think it's a very natural outpouring of whatever you call them, literary instincts, artistic instincts, what is there within you and within you?
I think that's true, actually, because the poetry allows you to explore a sort of liberated zone, in a way. And criticism is still linked to what someone else is doing. And you're responding to that, and you're also trying to devise a vocabulary that might be of interest to your readers. So in that sense, criticism is much more a social act. You know, I do realize that the way many of us do it, it's like an anti-social act, but it's not meant to be, actually. And poetry is something else. It's more idiosyncratic, it's more inexplicable. So yeah, that is certainly the case. But I'm going to hand the mic back to Keki now for the identity question.
Yeah, I want you to talk about exploring your identity as a Parsi via your poetry and Ranjit via your translations.
You see, I was going to England on a posting as a minister at the High Commission, and I was approached to write a book on the Parsis. And I said, all right, I'll try. We met in the aeroplane, incidentally, aircraft. I was asked by a very beautiful lady. And I said, well, what's on then? She came to the house, she said no, because they had got Keki Daruwalla, who did Bombay Salam, the film Bombay Salam, and she was a time and life photographer once upon a time. So they said it will be a visual and you will do the. Okay, I said. I got a second-hand book of Herodotus for 10 rupees at a second-hand bookshop. I was passing through the Connaught Place and I stopped there. I bought it, never were 10 rupees better spent. Took the book with me to England, started writing, wrote about 20 pages on our old history, and then decided that I was no scholar. And then I met the lady in London and she said she was not going ahead with the book. She came out with her own book later, beautiful photographs, a real coffee table book. So we thought it was very well. Ranjit has also done a lot of work on the Parsis as far as the heritage etc. are concerned. So then the poems started coming and they came. And I also started writing a play, Darius Godomenus or Darius Godomenus, and I was faced with the problem of how to depict a battle in a play. And I answered this query myself with a Greek chorus and a Persian chorus, and each talking about the battle which is going on right in front of them. And in fact, I included a portion of that in this book.
Right.
Honestly, I seem to be hopping in my childhood this afternoon, but anyway. It began for me really with the fact that I had very early on realized no simple answer to the great Indian question, which fortunately very few people now ask. Yeah, who are you? What are you? What are you? For obscure reasons, by which they mean identify yourself. So to this the answer always was no, there's no simple linguistic or regional answer because there isn't, because I belong to this at least doubly diasporic community. So you're likely to get a lecture about many journeys.
Which you might want to explicate for the audience, your doubly
I
diaspora.
might even do that, yeah. This is a good part of the country to do it. But I belong to a community called the Saraswat Brahmins. We have, as some of you, those of you from Goa will definitely know, there is a history of migration from Kashmir to the west coast and from Goa during the new conquests further south. So this is really a one-line summary of a far more complex history. But the point is that whilst this might be, it's diasporic, but for me personally it's very liberating because it has always been very liberating because it means I don't have to sit in a regional or linguistic box. These boxes having been of very modern provenance. We seem to think that these are ancient identities. They're about as old as the 18th century. So this was for me very early on a driver to really bear witness to the different parts of this diasporic history. Since there was no simple answer, I needed to form connections with the various parts of this history, whether it was through what you might call cultural investigation, or just acquainting myself with more parts of the kaleidoscopic puzzle. And Lala appeared because this is someone that my mother had often talked about as a figure. And there's no access to the language, because language is one of the first things you lose when you migrate. So I made it a project at a certain point very early on to really look closely at this work. And again, it's one of these mysteries of how, in fact, we approach any poetry. My first real acquaintance with Lala came from a Hindi paraphrase, a prose paraphrase by Shivan Krishna Rana, which then led me to J.L. Cole, and then this entire world of Lala opened up for me, because in Lal Dead I discovered a voice that was truly compelling. It was a formal challenge on many levels. I was always very hesitant about this notion of translating a woman poet. Also because this began for me at a point when I was engaged closely with a certain kind of left politics. There was the question of how does one translate a saint? How does one approach the sacred, about which one has, if not misgivings, one has a certain skeptical attitude about religion. And over the 20 years that I worked on this, many of these questions got resolved, the attitudes themselves changed. Also, I just apprenticed myself to learning the language. And eventually came around to the conclusion, this you know from the book, that it really wasn't even the production of a single person. Like many such traditions, you have an authorial signature. But the work, the poems are the work of generations of anonymous contributors, men and women, Hindus and Muslims, scholars and peasants. So there was also, at the end of this journey of translation, was also this marvelous, if you will, democratic vision of a shared authorship, which really allowed me to connect with the Kashmiri part of my heritage, both the cultural past and the present.
You know, I think it would be terrible if we sat through this session and didn't hear any poetry from both of these people. You can't have them talking about their professional lives and then not hear their poetry. So I think this is a good point at which, Keki, will you read some poems?
I would also like to hear your poetry. I mean, you are not just the anchor here.
I am the anchor for this session.
Okay, I'm repeating myself. Would you like to start? Okay. This is, I went to Pasargade. It's Cyrus's tomb is there, and his capital was there. It was supposed to be a great city, and it no longer is. There's just a tomb there, and that's it. And I went there in autumn, and I written about 9 sonnets in the sequence. I'll read 1 or 2, and possibly a little portion of the Arabella battle, if I may.
Yeah, I think we're all right.
25 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Sorry. The ground is not crisscrossed by water channels now. There is no thicket of saplings around the tomb, though across the road a thin-stemmed poplar grove flings in autumnal fires. There is no mosque dome, no bazaar, no kasbah, just one vast plain, and asleep on the skyline, python coils that sprawl the low detritus of the Zagros range. It's difficult to conjure up an entrance hall from the bull's severed legs, which you cannot find, or let 2 piers dictate a profound perspective, a colonnade etched only on the mind. to make a skeleton out of some bone splinter, an imperial precinct out of fluting columns, an ice age out of one solitary winter. I'll read one more. One should have come here at sundown, when amber settles quietly on the Kodachrome, and the colors of silence sweep the plains of Murgab like those mineral-colored waterfowl that home in from salt inlets of the Gulf to the river here. Over wrinkled waters, dusk fires would have blazed, all mirror fires burned twice, gold light, gold leaf, turned to darkening damp at the crinkled edge of days. Tranquility, stillness, quiet, shadow tones, and edges too subtle for the eye. The touch of light on water is not the touch of light on stone. The poplar grove flames, each leaf, it would seem, has a bronzed side to its face. Not a cloud to stain this excess of quiet, excess of peace, excess of rain.
To complicate my diasporic narrative somewhat, although I was born in Bombay, I spent the first 6 years of my life here in Goa, in South Goa. So when I come back here, I also come back to really my childhood. So this is a poem called The Myth of Eternal Return, Patorda, Goa. You leave the megaphone on the beach and nature to its own devices. Tread sand, paddle across clumped seaweed, and speak to the road watched by latticed eyes. Palm green is the color of asylum here, and sleep comes quickly in its shade. Here's where you rest from the water that burnt your hands at noon. But rest is hard work, every turn seems wrong, and where the chapel stood, a rusting sentry points to a lane that climbs among houses, and no hill. Your words grow lean and spare when breath is crafting ways to temper a slow. The croton leaves that speckle the wall are ash, but the east windows still give on the bamboo grove. Trying the gate, you look along the leaf-swept drive. The woman bending over Caesar's grave is the girl who raced you up the hill. She won, you fell, and have a scar on the forehead to prove it. You wait for her to turn. It's me, you say, after all these years.
I'm going to preface the Garlic poem for you. I mean, you're going to read the second one. No. Already.
This one's called Harbor Thoughts. Land is what you sight from a storm-broken ship, the mirage they forgot to sink. You hold it in your eyes, mouth clenched, around a flask of brine. Zameen is where your ancestors made landfall, measured off a site between the mountains and the wash of the sea, marked its boundaries with a king's horseback seal. Land is what you look for all your life. Zameen is what you hope to find.
In the previous section, Abhay read out a Garlic poem, and as he was reading it out, I thought I have to make Ranjit read this poem. So that's why.
This one's called Ghalib in the Winter of the Great Revolt, Delhi, 1857. And some of you will know that Ghalib, apart from being a poet, was also he led a very precarious life. He was a survivor. And he made what might have been a mistake, which is he allied himself. Well, he was the emperor's tutor. So he found himself on the side of the rebels in 1857. And when the great revolt was crushed, he very nearly got executed. From which he unfortunately redeemed himself by writing a glowing paean of praise to the British Empire that we poets have to survive. Ghalib in the winter of the Great Revolt, Delhi, 1857. The emperor's murdered grandsons hang from the gate of peace like hushed bells, and rifles drill the sentence air. My neighbor, the flautist, slit his veins last night, burning his prayer book before he died, true to a god of subtle tones, wasted on the deaf. Ghalib writes to a friend, all around us the Furies ride their burning horses. It's as though Taimur had broken Delhi's walls again, his cinder-street soldiers heaping pyramids of skulls in the streets, and a bakers for orphans to compute the profits of betrayal, the penalties of defeat. Cannon, the only thunder, writes Ghalib, and no rain. Gunners waving St. George's flag have driven the nobles from their charred mansions, tethered the peasants to the surly river. The coppersmith tapping at a dead branch fills the vacant sky with the privacy of his grief. The friend with a spy at his shoulder writes back, when did you become a poet of adjectives, roosting in the rafters of a broken house? Ghalib, the owl, must hide in the tamarind for now, but the genies of havoc will go on furlough soon. You say your inkwell is empty, but your dry quill still claws at the fibers of the heart. A pharmacist may drug himself with lyric, Ghalib replies, and a tiger may vanish in the rainforest of his hunter's dreams. But the dry quill is a reproach, and this raw winter could be the living tomb of my song. Send paper, friend. These are the last pages of my journal I'm writing on.
Keki, I was just going to ask you, I don't know if you have this poem on fairs with you, or are you going to recite it from memory? Because the thing that I admire about you is your ability to remember large chunks of words. I can't do it. It was a skill that we used to, be made to acquire when we were in school. But it's a lost art. Nobody remembers others' poems, much less their own. So I was thinking...
And never my own, but
whatever.
This first translation I remember. And I think you must hear the first poem first. Ye Sheher Udas. It's not one of the well-known ghazals. It's an ordinary, it's not a great ghazal. I don't know why I decided to translate it. Ye Sheher Udas. I don't know whether you will understand all the Urdu. वो सबको बहम सागर और बागा तो नहीं था, which means though each one didn't have wine and riches. Okay. And there is another thing where he says Satchak Labada, which means the garments are 100 patched, and torn. Okay. वो सबको बहम सागर और बागा तो नहीं था, ये शहर उदास इतना ज़्यादा तो नहीं था. गलियों में फिरा करते थे दो चार दीवाने, पर हर शख्स का सच्चाक लबादा तो नहीं था. मंजिली को न पहचाने राह इश्क का राही, नादा ही सही इतना भी सादा तो नहीं था. एक दिन पल भर के लिए यूं ही आंख लगी थी, पर सोकर ही न उठे ये इरादा तो नहीं था. ये शहर उदास इतना ज्यादा तो नहीं था. The translation runs the sad city. Though each one didn't own a bar, and the lines and the rhythm is exactly the same, the syllables, take care. Though each one didn't own a bar or plenty's horn, that should be up Daruwalla Street, Though each one didn't own a bar or plenty's horn, this city was never so sad and forlorn. 2 or 3 loonies roamed the by-lanes lost, but their garments were not 100 patched or torn. The lover, unable to spot the beloved, simpleton though he was never that lovelorn. One day, momentarily, the fatigued eyelid dropped, but to sleep and not wake up, that was never on. This city was never so melancholy and forlorn.
I think that's a great place to end, and I think I'll open it up to questions.
We must have a poem by Sridala Swami after
There's
all.
time enough tomorrow and the
She's a
after
very
to
fine
listen
poet,
to.
and she's come out with a very fine book.
Thank you, Keki. But now I'm opening it up to questions. Yes.
We've been talking about identity. But I just wonder, listening to your work and a session earlier when there was this Bangladeshi writer talking about being insulated within one language. It's very interesting because across the border that doesn't exist. Across the border, so would you say that a writer or a poet writes to establish identity, or is it to free up identity?
Who are you asking this question to?
Whoever.
I never had an identity problem, I'm sorry. And so I never wrote to find an identity, that is the least. And this book came out through a fluke. But there could be something subconscious that I've never written about the roots. And now I describe the book as a requiem. It's a requiem for the Zoroastrians who have as good as been extinguished, and now we are extinguishing ourselves. We are going extinct from 1,14,000 in 1941. We are now about 60,000. And the birth and death rate is 16 to 4. 16 die, 4 are born. And now it has got worse, I am told it is now 18 to 4. I hope I have answered the question.
Identity.
Are you salvaging your identity?
No. Identity is really, from my point of view, is a dangerous piece of nonsense. Let me say that really clearly, because it becomes the ground for a rhetoric of exclusivity within, and you construct the other because that's not identity. And this then becomes the ground for, I understand this, I belong to a micro-minority like you do, and my wife is Parsi. So, as you know, so I completely understand the anxieties of a community that wants to hold on to something it regards as its own. But imagine what happens when that becomes the doctrine of the majority, or even of a large number of people. This is the way to the gas chambers. And for that reason, I have no interest in the concept of identity and regard it as truly dangerous. But I would be much more interested in retrieving resources from all our pasts, which the closer we look at them will turn out to be multiple, hybrid, and kaleidoscopic. So that's my project, if that's what you're asking. So as a poet, I have no interest in recovering identity. The Lala project or any other translation project of mine also is not about recovering an identity. It's actually about disclosing the many multiple, unpredictable circulations that make up what we call the past.
So an artist or a poet is essentially a nomad. Essentially a nomad.
Absolutely. So for myself, I far prefer the term positionality or position, because that's something you define in relation to what you inherit, what you make of that, what you retrieve, and what you're producing with it. Because there's another problem with this concept of identity is the suggestion that culture is something that comes to you like a fossil fuel. A culture is what you make, and you make it with other people and with people very dissimilar from you. So it's that productive, in the present aspect of culture that gets lost when you insist on a closed identity. Also, you do yourself great damage when you think that identity is the wall that defends you in some way.
Any other questions? Okay, in that case, thank you for listening, and thank you for reading Keki.
Thank you.